Good evening. I'm Peter Murray. I'm chairman of the Temple Bar Trust. And the Temple Bar Trust is bringing Sir Christopher Wren's Temple Bar in Paternoster Square back into civic use. It's going to be the home of the Worshipful Company of Chartered Architects, but also it's going to have a charitable purpose, which will be to improve access to the architectural profession, and also we'll be running a whole series of events. Actual physical events is the plan, and that was the plan up until earlier this year, when of course we all went into lockdown. So now we're organizing a series of virtual events. We have a whole lot of virtual tours of the Temple Bar, of Paternoster, areas around St Paul's coming up in the autumn. But tonight I'm very pleased to welcome as our speaker Simone de Gale. And Simone is founder and chief executive of Simone de Gale Architects. And she's just been elected, re-elected as the RIBA National Council member. She's also a member of the Stephen Lawrence Charitable Trust. And that's very important for Temple Bar, because in terms of improving access to the architecture profession, clearly we will be working very closely with organisations like Stephen Lawrence Trust to help that to happen. So I'm really looking forward to hear what Simone has to say. She comes from a family of architects. Her grandfather was an architect, and her family worked in construction in London. Now she has a very successful practice of her own. So Simone, tell us about changing the skyline of London.
Hello, Peter. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me for this talk today. It's a real pleasure and honor to have you listen to my take on the future of London Skyline, and I think it's going to be a fantastic presentation. I hope you enjoy this, and please put all of your questions online, and we'll answer them when the talk is completed. Thanks also, Peter, for that fantastic introduction. It was very kind. So I'm going to go to my slides now and start the presentation. So my company, Simone de Gale Architects, this is us. Just a quick introduction here. We do architecture, interior design, master plan, and innovation. We've won a number of awards, most prominently the Architect of the Year Award in 2017 with the Women in Construction, and we've just been shortlisted for the Building Design Architectural Leader of the Year 2020, and hopefully we'll be successful with that. We've got a range of projects in London and internationally, and I've built my company up for nearly 10 years now, and it's been a fantastic journey. So moving on to the London Skyline, I've been doing a bit of research, and actually thanks to the work of New London Architecture, I've been able to find some really good statistics on the current state of play in London at the moment. And so we've got, at the moment you can see in London, we've got the 5 main boroughs along the River of Thames planned for 31 or more buildings over 20 floors. And then you'll see we've got buildings with 50 plus floors are starting to spread throughout London. At the moment, we've got Tower Hamlets, Greenwich, and Southwark who have the most planned skyscrapers. So this is quite interesting statistics, but I think what is more interesting is, or even more interesting is, what we have here is that at the moment, the percentage of skyscrapers by borough in the east, it's up to 48%. That's what we currently have. And although you would expect inner central London to have high numbers of skyscrapers, you can see that outer London was starting to get more skyscrapers. And you can see approximately half of the numbers are in outer London. So this is really interesting, because I think we've always known that the city is built on tall buildings, but for skyscrapers to be going up in outer London at this rate, I think it's very interesting to observe. You'll see on this table that out of all of the boroughs, the City of London still remains the key place for the predominantly luxury office, commercial skyscrapers, landmark architecture, and it's quite interesting to know that so many are being established in the City of London, even though the amount of space is still so restricted. So I want to ask why we are seeing this development and this increase in the rise of tall buildings in terms of the demand. So definitely we have a demand in housing. And I think that would be looking at mainly the outer London part of the survey, because this is where it's mainly residential development. And then of course we've got an increase in land prices, and the lack of lateral space in key locations, and this will be predominantly with regards to access, transportation, and being able to be within a proximity. Because even if we're in outer London, and want to travel into the city, it's key to be on that transportation route. So of course, we know that there's a global attraction to London, and it means that the inner city towers, they continue to populate and expand, as to the outer boroughs, as we've seen. We do have some problems, though. The problems in particular which have been evidenced are that we get impact from wind on structures. I don't know if you've walked through the city at a lunchtime, and you might be impacted by quite some very fast winds at ground floor level. Also, we have problems with overheating, noise, and storage. With regards to overheating in particular, we do build good buildings, and we build them airtight, and we insulate them very well, which is really good for the winter. And when it comes to summertime, we start to get issues in these particularly high-rise buildings. At the moment, we haven't really addressed the issue of high-rise buildings for larger families. So typically, you'd expect in a residential tall building for these to be smaller apartments, maybe 1 or 2 bedrooms, and then maybe only like the top floor or top few floors might be penthouses. So we need to address that issue. And then also lack of public spaces, gardens, and community environments. So these are the current state of play, the statistics, and the problems that we're having. So I'm now going to address what I've observed as good practice, and to encourage our viewers today to understand how we can take this forward. So I'm going to go through a few examples now. This first example is number 1, Blackfriars. And the reason why I've selected this building is because it's a vertical building, but it has mixed uses throughout the building. So one way that we can tackle the lack of community and public spaces is that we can start to mix the uses within these vertical buildings. We do it with horizontal buildings, and why not have the same mentality when we're designing vertical buildings? In number 1, Blackfriars, there is a mix of residential, retail, hotel, and public spaces. So within that one building, you'll have a mix of people, different uses, and a mix of amenities. So it just means that there's much more variety that you'll provide to a person's experience throughout that day, throughout that month and year. And this will be really important moving forward to understand that mixing the uses can be acceptable and should be promoted and encouraged when designing vertical buildings. The next example that I've used is 50 Fenchurch Street by Eric Parry. And I'm really impressed with this building. And when I first saw the designs, I thought, yes, this is definitely the way that we should be moving forward. It's received permission, and it's a 36-story offices. It is fully commercial, but it has a full height living green wall. And specifically because we are designing these buildings predominantly in London, where we know we've got very high levels of carbon emissions, and it can be quite dangerous in certain specific areas. We really should be encouraging living green walls on all of our buildings, not as a special addition. I mean, of course, this is a precedent, this particular building by Eric Parry. But if we start to integrate this thinking into all of our buildings, we will, first of all, we'll be able to have a more holistic environment where we're able to engage in nature, even though we might be in the city. But then these trees and these green walls actually clean the air for the people that are living and working in that environment. And so that is obviously going to have an impact which is going to be positive, and reduce our carbon footprint. So I think this is a fantastic way and a fantastic method that we can use for all of our buildings moving forward. The next example I've used is 22 Bishopsgate by PLP Architecture. And for this particular building, they've utilized the rooftop, and they've animated floors for public use. So the number one Blackfriars, there's a mix of uses, but this particular building, 22 Bishopsgate, there's much more public uses. So people can come in the building and utilize that space throughout the day, and there's much more animation in terms of the amount of people that will be visiting that building in throughout the day, the type of interactions that you're going to have, and being able to bring real life and animation to that building, and even though it's a vertical building. And I think that, again, this is really encouraging mixed uses within vertical buildings, and then access to the public. Because I think that sometimes when we see, these towers, these skyscrapers around London, although they might be beautiful, sometimes you get the impression that you can't get access to this building, and most of the time, factually, you can't unless you have an appointment. But when we start to mix the uses and get more public interaction, the building becomes more accessible, and we can start to have more sustainability in terms of the function of that building and the longevity, and then who it's associated with. And this is further still, animation at the ground floor. Number one, Bishopsgate Plaza by PLP. We have started to see quite a lot of animation on the ground floor of vertical buildings. And this is a perfect example, retail, cafes, water features, really bringing life to those spaces, so that, again, we're introducing more transparency. We're encouraging all types of people to come and use these spaces, and we're opening it up for social interaction, which is always going to be in the benefit of the city and just the perception of London as a whole, you know, open attraction for people from all different walks of life, and still being able to do business at the same time. And then this example by HTA. This is I don't know if you know about this building, but it's been recently completed, and I think it's fantastic. It's a modular constructed building, and it's been delivered within 24 months. So that's 2 years. And it's a really good example of new methods of construction. You know, I think up until a few years ago, we've still been a bit skeptical, particularly about modular design when we're looking at residential, when we're looking at tall buildings, when we're looking at luxury architecture. But this is one step forward in how we can utilize, I consider it like precision manufacturing, precision modular construction within architecture, and assembly of site, and then putting it together on site. And then this is the final example. This is by KPF Architects, number 52 Lime Street. And I really do like this building, you know, from an architectural perspective in terms of its aesthetics. This is a tapered skyscraper. And what KPF have done here, they've shaped the building so that when the wind hits at the tall height and it falls down to the ground, it starts to slow down the acceleration of that wind. So if we start to look at ways that we can work with the environment and the weathering that we're bound to have within the areas that our buildings are located, you can actually create something quite stunning architecturally as well, but then that is environmentally safe and is encouraging, you know, having a nice environment that people can feel comfortable walking down the street. So although we haven't designed any towers in London yet, we are starting to get some nice commissions. So I'm going to talk to you about some of the projects that we've been working on where we've been able to introduce some of these methods of design. And so here you can see this is a building that we've designed. It's a luxury residential for 200 apartments in Croatia, and you can see it's a tapered skyscraper. So again, we're using the same method that KPF used in their design, where we're able to break down the wind. And then also there is an aspect of modular construction on this project as well, where we're able to repeat the floor print and then design it, have it manufactured off-site and then assemble on site. This is a project that we have in Tbilisi in Georgia, and this is a master plan project. It's for 3,000 homes, retail center, commercial, and development and luxury park. And you can see that what we've started to do is green throughout this development. So we've got greening all on the roofs and then throughout the buildings as well. So these tall buildings were able to start to really bring in the environment into these buildings. And then here this is a competition entry that we had in Zagreb, Croatia. And you can see we've introduced a cantilever at first floor. So again, whilst when we have the wind hitting the tower at the top, because it will fall down onto the cantilevered roof, it will start to dissipate that acceleration. And so on the ground floor, we'll continue to have a a sound environment for people that are using that space. And then finally, this is a second master plan project that we're doing in Tbilisi. This is a commercial and retail development. And you can see what we've done. We've started to stagger these towers. So one building is broken up into 4 parts, where again, we're able to break down the wind within the environment, and we're able to green out throughout this building as well. So these are some examples where we're starting to introduce these methods of design, and what I believe is, you know, quite excellent practice, specifically when we're looking at tall buildings. So to summarize, in terms of London's future skyline, we really need to utilize our vertical buildings to create spaces for all types of people and mixed uses. I think it's not only you know, just for the benefit of society and for all different types of communities. I think it's for the benefit of the developers and the people who own and lease these buildings, because you're providing, you know, flexibility in terms of the space. You're providing, you know, complementary services and features for guests and for personnel who might be working in or living in those spaces. So it's really a good way that we should be moving forward in terms of being able to mix the buildings and create and have flexibility within vertical towers. So we should also be thinking about the environmental qualities, so that we can have a full holistic experience when we're visiting these buildings and working and living in them. Of course, and I think we have done for some time, thought about our surrounding environment and the buildings that we're integrating with, but we haven't gone far enough. You know, we have to think more about specifically the ground floor interaction, you know, the issues that we have with specifically wind. I think it is in central London. You know, it's like a tornado sometimes, you know, when you're traveling down these streets, and it's not pleasant experience. So we really have to work harder on integrating our vertical buildings with the ground floor, as well as having the animation, the public uses, etc., and so forth. And then we definitely have to do more research and more work to make skyscrapers a viable option for larger families, and of course for affordable schemes. You know, why would we not want to have larger families in vertical buildings, specifically if they're becoming more and more popular, and you know, a way that we can maximize the floor coverage within within a small footprint. So once we're able to come up with some much more interesting and innovative ideas, specifically focused on the larger families and affordable schemes, I think, you know, we could definitely have more vertical buildings in more boroughs around London. And that's the end of my presentation.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Simone, for that whistle-stop tour, both in London and Georgia as well, which a place I've always wanted to go to, Tbilisi, to have. I hear they're very keen on high-quality architecture there as well, so I'm sure you get a great welcome. So I would remind everyone in the audience, please do put your questions onto the chat panel so that Simone can answer them. But thank you very much for those who already put those questions on. So I'm going to start with a question from Chris Dyson, who says that he says, I'm interested in how you see we as designers can invigorate our city spaces whilst the city is suffering from a temporary loss of its primary population, the office worker. how would you do that as an innovative idea, do you think?
Well, definitely. I think I've been explaining it throughout my presentation. You know, we need to have more mixed uses within these buildings. It's really going to be in the favor of the leaseholders, of the tenants, and of the developers, and building owners to be able to have the flexibility to have different uses within their buildings. And specifically for looking at the coronavirus issue, yes, you know, there may be a temporary loss for the primary population, the office workers. So being able to have the flexibility where a space can be changed to maybe residential or even live workspace. This would be, you know, in that regard, the building owner would still be able to produce their revenue that they required, and then would be able to house people at the same time. Maybe even like some of those office workers may look at having a live workspace as opposed to just an office space. So if we start to have this flexibility within as part of the business plan at the forefront when we're designing these buildings, then it provides, you know, we can react to situations like a coronavirus, like Brexit, you know, these very acute situations which have a great impact and are not so frequent, but, you know, really have traumatic effects if we're not prepared.
Yes, I suppose that quite a lot of those changes you're suggesting would be slightly longer term, and I'm not quite sure whether Chris was intending, you know, what we could do immediately. But are you suggesting that the City of London should have more residential within the city? Because they've always rather fought against the idea of having residential because they think it restricts the ability to deliver commercial buildings. But I think it's very interesting if you look at, for instance, what happened to Lower Manhattan after 9/11.
Yeah.
Before 9/11, Manhattan was a totally, it was a financial district, monocultural financial district. After 9/11, the planners then really wanted to create a much more mixed-use development because quite a number of major companies had moved out of Manhattan to places like New Jersey. And that was a very positive response to a dire situation. Do you think perhaps the city needs to respond equally dramatically to the impact of COVID-19?
I think that it's something that we don't necessarily have to respond immediately and so dramatically, but I think it's something that has to be observed and it has to be considered, because after or once we start to come out of this situation, the coronavirus situation, a lot of the companies are going to be quite happy for their workers to be working from home, and I'm certain a lot of workers are going to demand that they have at least, you know, 30% or 50% of their time working from home, where they might be able to spend more time with their family, etc. So we need to be able to have the flexibility within our mindset and our consideration that it might be an option to consider maybe increasing the amount of residential spaces that we have available, or even looking at work-live spaces, because ultimately we want to have you know, a sound business plan. And if we're going to build a tall building, we're going to need tenants for that. And, you know, if the tenants are not going to make themselves available, then we'll have to find another use for them. So I think it's something that, you know, we don't have to change everything so dramatically straight away. But I think it's definitely something that needs to be observed and considered.
But you also talk about building more towers in outer parts of London.
Yeah.
And at the moment, the majority of those towers which are proposed nearly 90% of them are residential towers. Now,
Yeah.
do you think, as a result of the impact of Grenfell and the increased regulations which will have to be enforced to deliver taller buildings in the future, post Hackett and with new building regulations, do you think that will put developers off the idea of tall buildings altogether?
No, I don't. I don't at all. I think that I think that the concept of tall buildings is absolutely fine, and I think it's sound. I think what is wrong is the approach and how they're being designed and developed specifically for residential and specifically for affordable accommodation. You know, the mindset and the approach has to change. And you know, if these buildings are built well, they'll become sustainable. They will last. There's even the you know, the social housing development by Kate McIntosh. That's I know it's not quite as tall as a skyscraper, but it's still a mountain, and it's lasted for many years, and it's listed, and it's highly regarded, and the residents are very happy who live there. So if a space is designed well, it will last. But you know, the tragedy of Grenfell is, again, it's one of those acute moments where it has a large impact on the way that we are approaching design, because what happened at Grenfell shouldn't have. And so we need to take more care and build these buildings well. Once they're built well and sustainable, the profits will be there.
Thanks. Now, we have another question here from Chris, and he says, obviously, safety and security has to be important, and perhaps this time now gives us space in the city to reveal and appreciate its past and how that might inform its future development. Do you take history into account when you think about the way you design your buildings, and should they be doing that in the city?
Definitely. I think that history is really important, and you know, we do design specifically in the city in accordance to history. You know, where there's views which are protected to St. Paul's Cathedral, and that has a large impact on how the skyline is developed. And how new buildings are positioned with regards to that. One example is the cheese grater, Richard Rogers. It started off, I think, with a different design, but it ended up becoming that specific concept because of the views to St. Paul's needed to be protected. And so it starts to create a story, you know, integrating history with the future, and seeing the relation between buildings when they are developed. So we of course have to have a high regard for history, but then, you know, appreciate how we can how we can connect history to the future, which is bound to happen.
And now perhaps we could return a little bit more to mixed use as well, because Barry Monday has got a question. He said working patterns are changing, accelerated by the COVID virus. And you talked about that, the more home working and so on. So do you think that the city should be encouraging more flexible and mixed use development? Because clearly some of them could be residential, but you should put more uses within one building, rather than generally what happens in the city at the moment, that they are almost totally office space.
Yes, we should definitely be encouraging the mixed use. This is, you know, the trend that I've been seeing through the research that I've done in the new buildings which are being constructed. And it is providing the building owner and the developer with the flexibility of that space. And I think it's so important to have that flexibility. And then with the mixed uses, you're having many different interactions throughout the day, be it just being within that building as a person. You might work in one space, and then you might go to the gym in another. There might be a restaurant, and there might be a hotel. So you might meet different people who are traveling. And even from a business perspective, that will open up many different opportunities. There may even be an office or corporation who has some visitors traveling to London, and why not be able to accommodate those guests within your office environment. You just get to spend more time with those guests, and then maybe showcase the business and really make the most of that time. So there's many different ways that having mixed uses can be advantageous to the people who use those buildings, to the developers who are building those buildings, and then to the leaseholders.
Great. Now we've got a question from Joe Bacon, who of course has lots of experience with tall buildings, having been on the design team for 100 Bishopsgate. So Joe says, I have loved living in towers in Honolulu, Hong Kong and London. And are there any exemplar high-rise residential buildings in London that you would promote to any doubters about living in high-rise?
I would definitely be promoting this building by HTA it's actually in Croydon, which is in outer London. But I think it's fantastic. It's completely done by modular construction, and to have that height is absolutely amazing. And the facade is interesting. They've addressed the ground floor in terms of having public spaces, in terms of having a cantilever to break down any wind acceleration. I think this building is a real exemplar, and I think it's starting to win some awards as well. I've observed online, and this is a residential development.
So, have you been involved in any modular or prefabricated, as I used to be called, prefabricated development yourself? And will you be employing that in the work you're doing in Georgia?
We will be employing that in the work in the master plan in Georgia. And we have done a design for a residential development in London, and this wasn't a skyscraper, but it was modular construction. And again, we used, you have the modular and then the prefabrication, which is slightly different. The modular is the units and assembling the units on site, building the units off site and then assembling them on site, where the prefabrication is more about the facade and specific architectural details. And this development used both. So I think modular construction, again, I think is really something to observe and to have employed into designs, because there is still a little bit of skepticism about it, because this is always the case with new ideas. The majority are not going to try it until it's been tried and tested a number of times. But again, that's why I say this example by HTA is fantastic, and we'll definitely continue to use modular design, because I think it's the next step in architecture. It's precision manufacturing. So you design it in the computer, and it's robots who actually assemble these modules in a factory. We visited the factory where our modules were being designed, and it's just fantastic technology. So once you design it once, you can't go wrong.
Well, Barry Mundy has gone on to chat to say that he'd promote the Barbican as a great example of high-rise residential mixed with cultural and landscape uses. So that is a brilliant example, I think, of great inner city living, but almost the opposite to precision engineered buildings. That was very much a handcrafted concrete building, very dramatic, brutalist building in itself. But do you like the Barbican? Could you live there, or maybe you do live there?
I don't actually, but I think the Barbican is really interesting, specifically because it's like it's like a space where you visit and you can just get lost in that space. There's so many different activities and things going on. There's residential, you have the Barbican Centre itself, you've got public spaces and retail. So it's like a little miniature village itself. I think that's definitely a good example there, Barry. Thank you.
Yes, I think it's a great place to live for those who are living in it, but it is the Barbican. I think one of the problems with the Barbican is that it cuts itself off from the rest of the city, doesn't it? It's not really a part of the city. It is protected from the city, and that area of the square mile would actually work much better if you could permeate the spaces much more easily. That's my view of it, although I love it as a piece of architecture, and I would love to live there myself, actually. So yes, and I see that Jo Bacon has also said that she agrees with that. Now, if you have any more questions, do please put them now onto the chat, because I've just got one last point I'd like to put to you myself, Simone, which is, I mean, you have been a great champion for diversity in the profession for a long time, along with people like Elsie Owusu and Annette Fisher. Yes. But what do you think that now? I think there is Black Lives Matter has actually, I think, changed the agenda quite a lot. What do you think that the profession should be doing, and what will you be pushing for on RIBA Council for the profession doing more to accelerate this change, which we all hope will happen?
Well, I think that as a profession, we really need to do a lot more positive discrimination, I think, and it's something which I feel quite strongly about, because it's the only way that you can accelerate, the change that we want to see happen. So I think when I'm or in council already, because this is my re-election and I've been serving for 3 years, I've already been able to have a strong impact. I've been working very closely with John O'Sell and with Ben Derbyshire and Jo Bacon, actually, within the council, and being, myself, and just showcasing my talents and my business acumen. And it's just been fantastic, because it's just diversifying traditional roles. And also it's timely that you mentioned, the Black Lives Matter campaign, which, we've been through so much this year, haven't we? Yes, I'm a member of a group called Real Estate Women, and they've actually invited me to be part of a Black Lives Matter roundtable. And at the moment, there's about 10 of us. I don't know if you've heard of the Real Estate Women, but it is what it says on the tin. And so at the moment we've been putting together a manifesto as to what we want to change in the real estate industry within architecture, property development, real estate as a whole. And once we've completed our manifesto, we'll be able to advocate for the changes that we want to see. And these are things like, zero tolerance on racism, no judgment for the way that someone might look or their culture, and looking at ways that we can interact and engage with employees who might feel intimidated or aside from the rest of their team, and just real practical tools which we could use within the real estate industry to help to heal this part of society, so that we can make the change that we all are desperate to see.
Well, thank you very much, Simone. Thank you very much for your comments, and very glad to hear what you've just been saying, because, as I said at the beginning, it's very much a part of the programme for the Temple Bar Trust to support greater diversity in the profession, to raise funds, to support students accessing architecture education, and to help do precisely the sort of things you're saying the profession needs to do. And so last comment I see on the chat is from Barry, Monday again, and he says thank you for a great talk, Simone. How best might Temple Bar help to encourage diversity? So anything you'd like to add just before we close on that, what we could do actually at Temple Bar to help?
Yeah, I think, even mentioning this topic is fantastic. I think that's a great start in itself. I know that the Temple Bar Trust have invited a number of speakers to give talks, Black speakers like myself, and I think that's fantastic. So there's a great start there, and maybe just encouraging more programs where you've got a diverse panel, and diverse events, cultural events. I think these will be really useful ways to move forward.
Great. Thank you very much for those comments, and thank you very much for your presentation. Tall buildings are something that always excite a lot of interest in London, and they have definitely changed the skyline and the feel of London incredibly over just the last 20 years or so. So it's really good to hear your comments on that, and I look forward to when you're commissioned to do a tall building yourself in London. So thank you again very much for your presentation. Thank you all for watching, and good night.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Peter, and thank you to the audience as well. Thank you so much.